Back at it. Here we are looking at our second comp in this project file that has some likely familiar artwork in it. We're going to use this as a chance just to get used to moving things in 3D space at different directions. And we'll learn another new trick or two. So first order of business is that when I made this composition, I brought in these layers, and I thought that the comp would just be like 10 seconds long. And then I realized that, of course, it's not going to be 10 seconds long. It's going to have to be longer than that. And so with a little trial and error, I realized that 30 seconds was more adequate for the scrolling text and all that. So what we have in our composition is two layers that only have a lifespan currently of 10 seconds. And this is good recap or a reminder for you about how layers work and how ins and out points work. So we need to extend the life of these. Otherwise, if you scrub past 10 seconds, the artwork is gone. So put your playhead at the very end of your composition. And one way that we can lengthen or shorten a layer, if you recall, is by just grabbing the end of it. So you can see as I pass my cursor over the end of the layer, I get a east and west arrow, and I can click and drag and just start saying, all right, I want you to live that long. We actually don't want this one to live that long, but we'll do it anyways. This second guy, the crawl, let's do it a different way now. Let's use keyboard shortcut. Let's use Option or Alt, and then right bracket, which is over by your P button. So Option, right bracket, and that just does, it moves the out point to wherever your playhead is. So that's another nice way. So yeah, we moved both of them, and that was a little premature. But it's okay. This is good. This is good practice for us. 4 seconds is where I am calling it quits for the Star Wars text, and where the crawl should start. So now let's just try these techniques again. I'll grab the Star Wars, the top one, and I'll bring it forward. Now hold down Shift, and it's going to snap to your playhead. That's pretty convenient. And then the crawl, let's use a keyboard shortcut again, just so you get used to using both methods. The command for moving your in point would be Option and then left bracket, and that'll bring the front up. So now you can kind of see the stair-stepping nature of stacking layers. Okay. All right, let's work with 3D on these things. We need to see our switches, not modes. So I'm going to click on that little bottom button and bring up my switches. And I need to turn both of those into 3D layers. Now when I click on my Star Wars logo layer, I get the 3D arrows. So I don't know if you remember what this one does, but it doesn't scroll like this large body of text does. It actually comes like right in front of the camera and just flies back into space. So, or at least that's what my memory's telling me. I didn't even go back and look at this. I'm winging it. But I've seen this movie a lot, so I'm pretty sure it's burned into my head as being accurate. Tell me if I'm wrong. Okay, we need to use position. That's all we need here. Well, we'll be using opacity as well, but P on your keyboard will open up position. And here's our X, Y, and Z values. So we need to bring this closer to us, which means a negative Z value. So if you scrub that value, grab it and drag it to the left, and hold down Shift, get it fairly close to us. I'm at negative 1013 pixels for my Z value. What is wrong with this artwork? It looks terrible. Well, it shouldn't look terrible. I created it in Illustrator. And as we know about Illustrator files is that they are vector-based artwork. So it should have an infinite scalability characteristic to it, which means that it constantly redraws itself at any scale to maintain a beautiful, crisp, clear image. We know this, but we're looking at the Star Wars going, that does not look beautiful. That is because you need to tell After Effects that you would like it to perform better by computing and redrawing the or even recalculating the vector information for a specific layer. So that little box is right here underneath the column that looks like a little sun or something like that. If you hover over it, it says this is collapse transformations if it's for comps, and it's continually rasterize if we're dealing with vectors. And so that's what we want to do. We want to continually rasterize this vector artwork. As soon as you click it, boom, there's the nice, crisp, clear, beautiful vector file that we know and love. Okay, so at frame 0, I am going to set a keyframe for position. So it just recorded that information, and we're going to send it back in space. So I'm going to the very end of this. We're going to grab the Z value, and we're going to push it back so that's relatively small. Somewhere back here, it's going to just fade into the depths of space. So there's our first travel. Boom. Let's try something, shall we, please? Just so that you can see the difference. Open up your folder that has the Star Wars art in it. Grab the Star Wars logo, bring it into this composition. And let's recreate this as if we said, oh, we don't need 3D. It's just a scale change. Because that's all it looks like. It just looks like it's really big and it gets really small. So let's try it with this one. Let's take scale. And let's scale it up so it's about the same size. Continually rasterize that sucker. Animate scale. And then go to that other keyframe where we put a position keyframe down, and then we'll just get it somewhere about the same spot. Now I have a beginning and an end at the same scale. But what I might do, just to have you see the difference, I might just recolor. Let's see here. Make it red. I'm going to make it red, and then I'm going to just lower its opacity a little bit so we can see it. All right, here's the difference. So if I just scrub over this, you can see that the yellow one, which is using depth and space to go back, actually starts off faster, but the one that's using scale starts off slower. And then about halfway through, the original one that's using space starts to sort of slow down, but the scale one speeds up. This is the difference between scale changes and moving something through space optically, how it behaves in our sort of perception of scale. It's much more realistic to move this thing through space, because if you have a car that's driving toward you very fast, as it's really small in the distance, it looks like it's barely moving. And it gets closer to you, and it's kind of getting a little bit bigger. And then as it approaches your proximity, it's really hauling ass. So that is what is going on here in the calculations of these layers that we put through space. They're mimicking the reality of how things actually move around us. Scale does not. Just try it. You'll see. It's like the opposite. So I'm going to get rid of the scale one. Put us back to where we belong here. So I said that somewhere around here, this thing sort of just dissolves and disappears into space as if it fell out of a light or something like that. So I'm just going to use opacity and just make it go away. So if you remember, you can do a keyframe. You can lay down a keyframe by using your key shortcuts for all of these different attributes, and then the Option or Alt key. So I'm going to do Option T, and that you can see just laid. Oh, I did them for both though. I don't want one on the bottom. You should get out of there. I think it was because they were both selected. So Option T gives me 100%, and then at the very end here, I'm going to set it to 0. And we have the drift, and then it just fades away, ready for our scrolling text. So there's a nice little trick. It feels like it's going out of our like vicinity of light and dissolving. I don't even know if that's very accurate. I'm going for it. Now we are going to move on to the crawling text. So the crawling text we need to do one of two things. Either scale it up or move it a whole lot closer to the camera, to us. And I suppose that you could get away with either one, but what I like about moving it closer to the camera is that it sets us up for, no, I don't know if it matters. I didn't do the scale one when I was prepping this. I just did the close one. Well, screw it. We'll just do the close one. So P for position. And bring that negative Z value. I'm at negative 930. And again, it looks like junk, so let's polish it up by clicking the continual rasterize button. That would never work if it was a raster or pixel-based image, by the way, if it was something out of Photoshop. They don't even have that button is not even available if we're working with a JPEG or a PNG or a Photoshop file. Just FYI. Okay, so now the other thing I need to do is I need to move this thing down. I'm holding shift while I scroll. You should just get used to that. I'm going to move it down so it's off screen. And then I'm going to set a keyframe for position. I'm going to go to the very end, and we're going to get this thing back up above. Okay. So boom, Star Wars, and then scrolling text. But if your memory serves you correctly, it doesn't just go up. It's sloped and goes backwards, right? It's sloped and goes backwards. So let's look at opening up our rotation options. Okay. If we wanted this to slope backwards, we would know that the rotation needs to revolve around the x-axis. So if I slope this thing back so that it is pointed in that direction, look at that. But still, there's something very wrong with it. We're making this element go up, and all we did was just rotate it so it's laying kind of on its back, but it's still going up, and that's not the way that this thing should operate. So we're going to reset that rotation to 0, and we have to use a little bit of a trick. I wouldn't even say it's a trick. It's a very practical, common technique, and you're going to probably start using it a lot. and it is by utilizing a new layer that is known as a null object. And a null object is found under the layer menu. Layer, new, null object. And if you know anything about the English language, null means empty or void of information. So that's exactly what it is. It's a layer that just has no pixel information to it, but it does retain all of the other good stuff about positions and scales and things like that. So this null object I'm pulling down to put right above the crawling text, and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it tilt. I'm going to make it a 3D layer because it needs to operate in the 3D space with the rest of my layers. And I'm going to open up position. I want to get the position right up to where the crawling text is, and that just means in the Z area. So I can tell that my position value for the crawling text is a -930. So I'm just going to click in there. I'm going to say -930, and it's now right up next to the crawling text. So now what we're up to is we're going to say this crawling text is doing its own thing, but we would like it to take on some of the attributes of this this invisible layer. And by doing that, we're going to set the crawl text as a child and the tilt layer, the null object layer, as a parent. So I'm going to grab the little curly Q pick whip right here, and I'm going to drag it and point it to the tilt layer, just like this. This is the same as saying, all right, I would like the tilt layer to be the parent. You can do it either way. This way, or just doing that results in the same thing, which is assigning the tilt as the parent. So now what that means is that if I take rotation on the tilt layer and I rotate my X back, somewhere around here, I'll do -64. Now that text is doing exactly what I needed it to do, which was move vertically, but in a rotated sense, right? Push itself back. So a few things need to be tweaked. And that is because we rotated this, it changed the orientation and visibility factor of that layer. So I am going to go to the first keyframe of my crawling text, and I'm just going to change that Y value so that it's not visible. I'm going to go to the very end, and I'm going to make sure that it goes off into the distance. Depending on your preference, we don't get to see an entire line until about halfway up, because otherwise they're cut off. I don't really remember how it was done in the original films, but this kind of works. But if it's not doing it for you, you could take that tilt layer and its position. Now that they're parented, they'll both move together, and just move the Z space back down closer to a positive, and it might give it a little bit more room. But then you'll probably have to change the position of the crawling text layer again. So that it's off screen. So I can handle that. So if you just think about it, this layer is now giving up master control to the layer tilt. Anything that I do to tilt is going to happen to this layer, but this layer still has its own independent attributes. So you can get some really unique combinations of moves and positioning by using these null objects. When we get into more advanced stuff, we'll use the null object a little bit more, especially when we work with a camera. But so there's that. Now the very last detail, and this is a good recap for us too, is that as this text gets closer to the top of our screen, it also fades away, kind of like the Star Wars did. So how would we do that? How do we handle that fade? I am simply going to cheat. Well, I'm not even cheating. I don't know why I call it cheating. It's doing things in an awesome way. I am going to get my rectangle tool. I'm going to make sure that my fill is set to a linear radiant. And I'm going to make sure that my gradient is from white to black. I'm going to double click on the rectangle tool, bloop, bloop, and it fills my entire composition with a new solid with a gradient. There's my gradient handle. I'm going to move this black handle up to somewhere near the top, and I'm going to take the center point and move it probably somewhere around like this, so that my gradient happens in the top third-ish of the composition. And I'll shorten that. I'm going to squeeze it in right above the crawl text. I'm going to rename it fade. What do you think I'm up to? What do you think I'm up to? I do not need to make it a 3D layer. I am simply going to use a track matte for the bottom layer. So the crawl text, I'm on the track matte column, and I would say I would like you to track not the alpha inverted, because there is no alpha. It's all solid pixels up there. It's black and white. So that means I'd like you to put yourself in the luma area, which means the areas that are brightest, the white. And as soon as I do that, this text maintains its presence in the white areas, but then look, as it gets up into the top, it fades, because that's where the black pixels were, and it is totally invisible, transparent. It's up to me or you if you would like to change that gradient. You have to open up the contents, open up rectangle 1, click on the word gradient, and that guy comes back up with the little handles, and you could, change the location so that it fades out a little bit earlier. That's pretty nice. And look at that, it's really cool. It's so cool. So, do a little RAM preview and see how we did. Feels pretty authentic. I don't need to sit here and watch the whole thing, but we'll just get a feel for the beginning. Bum, ba-dum, bum. Look at that. That's slick. And it fades. Oh, we just started to see the fade, but that's okay. We get the idea. And that is coordinating multiple objects in 3D space, different directions, utilizing a null object, and then bringing back a couple other tricks, which is always helpful to rely on some old stuff. So there you have it.